Hey everyone, and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me is
Ray Christner.
And today we have an episode on acceptance, a bit of a successor to our problem solving episode. And I think it did a really nice job pairing with that and kind of talking about the other side of the coin. What are your thoughts, Ray?
Yeah, I think a great topic, one that I think we use a lot clinically. I think things that people hear often in popular press, the terms used quite well. And I think just the idea to kind of talk about it. And I like that it's a living psyched piece, because I think it's something where while it can be therapeutic, it's also just a simple life choice.
Yeah. And I think we do a nice job, especially there at the end of, talking about all the non-clinical ways that acceptance is such a relevant part for us.
In some ways, we all accept on a certain level every single day. There's always, I don't know if there's a day that we don't have to just accept certain things that happen, whether it's traffic, whether it's rain, whether it's whatever. So yeah, I thought that was kind of fun to think about, and maybe a good intro for when people do have to use it for more significant situations. And so I guess, Paul, what's your thoughts on kind of a takeaway for the episode?
Something for me that you shared, and I think I maybe even introduced it in the episode, but you had brought it up as we were getting ready. It's this idea of acceptance is an active process, and it's a conscious effort. It doesn't just happen passively. It doesn't or automatically, but it really does take an effort there, and it's something that has to be practiced. I think so often we can kind of default it to, what we do think of it as like, oh, that's the other side. You either work hard or you accept. And
right.
No, you can work hard to problem solve, or you can work hard to accept, but both are work.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And, for me, there were so many like little points throughout there that, I thought were valuable, but I think just this idea that acceptance involves, and this idea that we're going to give it space to maybe change later, or maybe it will never change, but that we're kind of letting go of this push that creates more anxiety or more stress for us. And it's okay experiencing what we're experiencing in the moment.
Yeah. And funny enough, it makes it more tolerable in some ways. The act of accepting can be one of the most helpful things to reduce those uncomfortable emotions.
And it then helps us move forward. And, so I hope those of you listening, if there's something that catches your interest or a different example maybe you have, as always, please reach out to us, share on our social media accounts, or shoot us a message. And we're always interested in how these things play in your daily living.
With that, we hope you enjoy this Living Psyched episode, ACCEPT. Find out what it means to me. Well, Ray, we're back with a Living Psyched episode, and kind of piggybacking off a previous episode today, previously talking about problem solving. Today we're talking about acceptance.
Yeah. And a concept that I think, probably most people have heard of, like, I think a lot of like popular press articles, they may have heard of, acceptance and commitment therapy, something of that nature. But yeah, just a different way to approach situations, maybe that we don't have a lot of control over.
And I think that's really where acceptance shines, and where we were talking about that, I guess, kind of branching tree of, when a situation occurs where we have high control, problem solving is probably the better route to go. But when we don't have a lot of control, I think acceptance is probably the best option that's available to us, because the other one is when we're just kind of stuck. And feeling stuck is just, unless it's a good feeling, we don't want to be stuck.
Yeah, I think, we end up being stuck, or we end up creating ourselves a high level of anxiety and stress on a problem that we can't fix. So it not only, it can actually go even more negative. So I guess, Paul, maybe just so we're kind of have everybody on the same page, let's define it. Like when we use a term like acceptance, what's a definition? How do we define that word?
So I've been, using this in sessions for a while and kind of trying to add a few different definitions and coming together with one. And I think the one I've landed on that I think fits the best is acceptance is our ability to validate and embrace our emotions, our thoughts, our experiences about a situation, but really working to not judge the situation or pressure ourselves to change the situation. And so it's kind of like a tightrope act of we have to be in tune enough to recognize that our experiences are valid, but then we have to have the self-restraint to not try to influence it or judge it. And, one thing you shared earlier, and I think I really hope when we kind of expand on this, is that it's not an easy or an automatic thing to do.
No, not at all. I mean, I think that, we've all had maybe people tell us, oh, you just got to accept what's happening. And then in reality, when we try to do that, it's a lot harder than we give it credit for. I don't think it's automatic. I think that it's something that I think people have to consciously be aware of and actually practice. I mean, I think it's something where, we may not be good. We may not be good at it initially. We may have to work at it. And, I think with time and age, I've gotten better at it, where it's now I can accept things much faster. But I remember, especially being younger, that was a difficult task for me. And it took me a while. I think I never used the term acceptance, but I kind of went, well, I just have to let things happen. Like you just have to let it happen and things were going to work out. And that's the mindset that I moved into. But it was work to do that. I just don't think it's a quick and easy thing for us to do.
And I think a lot of times we might be kind of mislabeling acceptance. When someone's like, oh, well, I just have to get over it. Like at times we're like, oh, well, that's acceptance. And no, not really. That's more this idea of like resignation. And so, I think we can try to move forward from things, but oftentimes I think it involves some sort of avoidance that's happening there that, we're not maybe we're not then attending to the emotional piece. And then we're not trying to judge. So, if I'm shutting down my emotions, it is easy to just move on from it and get over it. But we're not really accepting it at that point. We're avoiding it in a way.
Yeah. I mean, so I think it's, so we said what it is. I think, what it's not, I think no one's saying that acceptance is that you have to like the situation, that you want it to happen, even that you support that it's happening. I think the accepting piece is that we're not struggling against it. So I think sometimes we end up struggling against the situation. And again, we may create more anxiety. We may create a whole bunch of more stress for things that we can't control, rather saying, okay, it's the card I've been dealt today. This is what I have to deal with. What are my options? And, I often use the phrase when I'm working with patients is, sometimes acceptance is just giving it space.
Yeah.
Just some space to let things either happen or to let us get into a better spot to deal with those situations. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about them. They are what they are. But by accepting it, we're not pushing against it. It might be a better way forward.
And oftentimes when we're talking about this, like, the idea that I have with acceptance, and you just use the language there, is moving forward or just movement. And I think so often when we're not accepting, and again, even going back to if we're avoiding or if we're creating this high level of anxiety, all of that is we're staying stuck in the moment or in the experience. We're not attending to it. But acceptance, I think, when practiced and when done well, it's like that breath of fresh air. It's like that, hey, I'm in a probably pretty frustrating situation, but I'm not really experiencing the anxiety or the pressure from it. I'm able to, maybe even find a little bit of validation for myself. Like I'm doing the best that I can.
Right.
I'm recognizing my limits, and I then don't have to take ownership over what's not mine. And I can then, let it, recognizing out of my control. So I can then only really focus on what I can control. And we were talking a little bit about that dynamic with problem solving.
Right.
And I think acceptance is, again, this other side of the coin when we're talking with problem solving. In some ways, it bleeds over into the same side of the coin, because I think good acceptance allows for effective problem solving to focus on, again, what we can control and what is it in our wheelhouse. So we're kind of going around in circles here, but I think just to reiterate that acceptance is a really useful tool, but it is a tool that we have to actively use.
We do, and it's this idea of giving ourselves permission. Permission to be who you are, permission to feel what you feel, and permission to experience what you experience. And again, it sounds so simple. I think it's hard to do, but I think it's powerful. I had a conversation with a patient recently who is dealing with grief. Had a spouse that died recently, and we're talking recently 3 or 4 weeks. So it's not unusual to grieve. I mean, that's a normal process, but she was working so hard not to show her grief that she created herself more problems. And when we sat back and said, like, listen, it's okay to feel that. And, it's interesting. I think society sometimes pushes us not to accept, so she goes to the doctor and they go, hey, let us give you an antidepressant. No, like your husband died. It's okay. Cry, be sad, accept that right now, this sucks. It's terrible. And there's nothing that you can do that's going to change it. And it's okay to feel those negative feelings. And it's interesting, like therapeutically, just talking about that and letting her say, like, okay, I have permission that I can grieve. And there's no timeline on it. I don't have to be well in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And maybe it's going to be 12 months and I'm still going to be working through grief. It's okay. And I think that it's, the interesting part with, and the reason I thought of this individual was the fact that she said, it's okay if I feel this way, almost made her feel better. She actually was like, I can be home and cry and I can think about what the situation is. She had to accept where she was at, trying to push against it and to feel happy. It wasn't congruent. It wasn't, it just felt so, it created so much angst on her that it actually made it worse. So that's how I use accept.
It's interesting, like, swap out a couple of details, and there's an individual I'm working with is going through something very, very similar. And, even a similar timeline, like I think we're at two weeks, but for a parent rather than a spouse. And as we're going through and we're talking and processing, one of the pieces is she recognizes her own growth, and she recognizes and she's giving herself that permission. And she's like, she's both proud and grieving at the same time. And she's shared, like, where I was, a year ago, 2 years ago, I never would have been able to experience this in the same way, but I'm letting myself experience that. And so I think permission is like, we have to almost give ourselves that permission to accept, again, that it's an active process, not a passive one.
Right. And I'm going to go back to, I think our problem solving episode when you talked about the rain at your wedding, right? In some ways you had to say, okay, we have to give ourselves permission that this is what we're going to deal with. And then you move on. And
that was certainly, that was not an easy there was disappointment. There was frustration, it's a year and a half of planning, why does it have to, it's beautiful in the day before, it's supposed to be beautiful in the day after. Why that day? And that's judgment, and that's getting stuck. And it's, that doesn't really allow for any productive pieces. And it wasn't until my wife and I sat down and we said, okay, let's get some umbrellas just in case, we have these plans for afterwards, but maybe we're going to change them a little bit. That if it is pouring and we're soaking wet, we have an opportunity to go change our clothes. And we make it the best that it can be.
Right.
And I think oftentimes that's the opportunity that acceptance gives us, is that making it the best that a situation can be, rather than trying to make a situation we can't control be something that it won't be.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great way to put it. It's, and I've had people in the past, when we talk about acceptance, mislabel it as being almost apathetic. Well, you're just giving in. You're just giving up. No, I mean, there's just nothing that you can do. I mean, it's not. It is. Acceptance is a path forward. That's the important part. And when we were talking about this, I was, Paul and I were chatting, and I mentioned this idea of that. This is one. It's not new, but there was an article I remember reading years ago. Carl Rogers, who's this famous psychologist, wrote an article that was not published until after he died, and it was about what he learned about acceptance. And kind of the summary of the article is essentially that he learned that acceptance reduced his desire to rush in and fix things. And that as humans, or as persons, I think how he puts it, we basically will move in a positive direction when we accept things. It's that path forward. So it's not apathy. It's accepting it for us to be able to move forward. Because until we say, all right, the rain's here, we're still getting married, it is what it is. We're going to make this the best damn wedding we can make.
Get some good photos in the rain.
That's right. Yeah, until we hit that acceptance piece, then we're stuck. And it's contrary to the belief that it's being apathetic, I think it's just another form of problem solving. It lets us move in a direction. And I think Roger's comment's right. I think sometimes when we let things happen, we have a better chance of moving in the right direction. Sometimes when we're trying to force something, it puts us in a place where, again, we're stressed out, we have greater angst. Or maybe we make bad decisions because we're trying to change something that we really can't change.
I think one other element is, I think acceptance a lot of times can feel counterintuitive, where, to that point of, aren't you feeling apathetic because shouldn't you try to create change? Shouldn't you try to, fight against it and do anything in your power? And I think accepting something, it's counterintuitive, because we do, I think so often, we want to control what we can. We want to create the positive outcomes, and to let go of that control feels counterintuitive of gaining freedom and flexibility. And I think that whether it's, individuals in my personal life, me personally, or clients that I'm working with, I do think that there's an element of, you can kind of feel like a leap of faith the first time you do it, or the first few times you do it, because it can feel scary. That perception of control can be such almost like a false security blanket, and to let go of it and say, let me accept it, it is scary. And so recognizing, as counterintuitive as it is, works, and it's effective, and you have to do it. You have to do it well. It's not just letting go. And again, being complacent and allowing things to occur, but doing the work of recognizing and, attending to your emotions, your experiences, but not letting that hamper you, and taking that moment, that time to, as persons, move in the positive direction.
Yeah. And I think that is really the misconception, is how much control acceptance really does give us. I mean, I think, again, acceptance doesn't mean passivity. It's a conscious choice to accept something. So, it is a control thing, but I think people get so confused with it, because as a society, as I was thinking through getting ready for this episode, what really kind of popped into my mind was all of these motivational speakers that are out there, that it's, you got to do something, you got to do something, you got to, and it's this push for certain actions. And I think that's great. I love a lot of those motivation things. I think that's wonderful. But I think sometimes we push against something that's just not movable. And that's exhausting. And that's where I think the acceptance also plays a part. Is the reason it's thoughtful and not just this passive piece is that, number one, acceptance isn't right for every situation. We did a whole episode on problem solving for that reason. But sometimes our decision has to be, okay, right now, this is not something I can problem solve around. I need to give that space. And because I'm accepting it today, doesn't mean that it's going to be that way forever. Sometimes it's like being in a meeting and you table an agenda item. Sometimes you just got to push it off. It's just not the right time. But there's so many things I think that make people feel guilty about accepting things. And we don't need to. Like I said, it's sometimes we just have to go, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to be in this experience. Don't have to change it at the moment. Time will be great sometimes later.
I don't know if all meetings kind of have this, but I remember as a part of my graduate program, I had to go and I had to attend some Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. It was recognized that I was there, for the intended purpose. But they started with a serenity prayer. And it's, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I believe that there may be more to it, but man, that section right there, it's problem solving and it's acceptance.
It is, right?
But the other piece, the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that's an important piece of, we have to be good at assessing truly what can I change and what can I not? What is within my sphere of influence and what is just something that not. So for me, in my wedding, unfortunately, the weather is out of my sphere of influence.
That's right.
I can't control it. I can't even influence it. So I have to accept it.
And you can be angry at Mother Nature and swear at Joe Cantori for the forecast. It doesn't change it.
As many times as possible.
Right.
I think it's an important piece because we can over-accept. Right. And I think if an individual over-accepts, that maybe is a bit of complacent. That's when we become complacent. So that's when we have the control to influence and we don't. And so I think acceptance is the tool of using, it's a powerful tool, but really when used in the right way at the right time. And making sure that we're aware of the circumstances of when acceptance is most effective and when it can become something that maybe is seen as apathy. And I think maybe that's the reason why, especially in our society and our culture, acceptance does kind of get this passive bad rap at times, because we then see it as lazy or we see it as unmotivated. And when acceptance is done well, it's anything but. It's the best move that we can take.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a great point because I'm thinking about, I gave the example of the person that's dealing with grief and the fact that she had to accept the fact that that's where she's at. And it's okay to feel grief. That doesn't mean it's okay for her to lay in bed all day and do nothing. That's not the accepting piece. It's giving permission for the feeling. It's giving permission for the experience. But there's still actions that she has to take in different directions. But when you accept the emotion and the place you are in your life, it's easier to take those action steps. So she was trapped by the anxiety of people are going to judge me because I'm still hanging on to the grief and I'm still sad. And when they ask me about my husband, tears may come out of my eyes. And she's created all this anxiety that made those action steps harder. Mm-hmm. The fact that she says, it's okay that I grieve. And if somebody tells a story about my husband, it's okay that I shed a tear. That's not bad. It's not bad in 4 weeks and it's not going to be bad in 6 months. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Now going in public and having somebody say, hey, we're sorry to hear about your husband, and her tearing up now's not as uncomfortable because she's not trying to hold it in. So does that make, like, I'm trying, like, for me, I'm like, I think that's the difference. We're not accepting poor behavior. We're just accepting where we're at.
Yeah. And a Living Psyched episode. So I don't want to take it too clinical, but that's some cognitive restructuring and reframing that's going on right there.
Sure.
And, working to create a different perception that then influences our, emotions and our actions. And, so I think acceptance, while, one of the most valuable therapeutic tools, but, for her, it allows for some normalcy and or at least the freedom to be fluid in those moments of, I can be out in public and I can put myself in those situations.
Right.
And I don't have to stay stuck and kind of that enticing feeling of, I do just want to lay in bed because I can't accept that I might cry in front of someone if they bring up my husband.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, given that this is kind of a Living Psych episode, I think the other piece is there's many aspects in our life where accepting the situation for the moment is okay. It doesn't have to be as severe as grief. It doesn't have to be, it could just be a day that we're just really burnt out and we go, man, this was just a rough day. And you know what? For tonight, I'm giving myself permission to just take a break. And I'm going to veg out and binge watch whatever.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean we're going to do it every night. Doesn't mean that, but accepting the fact that, hey, this is where I'm at today, versus feeling that way, going home, pushing ourselves to a point where our frustration's higher, and then our significant other comes in and says something and we snap at them, and then we're feeling guilty about that. And then our kids come in and we yell at them, and it spirals in the wrong direction. Rather than that, to just say, okay, this is a day I need a break. Now, if we feel that way every day and we stop doing other activities, probably a problem. But there are days that we have to do that. And it is a form of acceptance, because I know people, when they do that, then they feel guilty and they go, I shouldn't have done that. I should have cleaned my house. I should have done this. I should have done that. And there's all these shoulda, coulda, wouldas that come into play. But in the end, it just spirals further. And if they would have just given themselves a couple hours to reset, get their head in a better place, the next day could have been more productive. So those, I guess, listening, I think I would encourage, find times throughout the day that you can do it. I do it at times when I'm at my desk and I'm working and trying to get something done and it's not coming and I'm getting frustrated. And I have to say, all right, I just have a block right now. I need to get up and go do something else. Like, I can keep pushing for the next hour, but I just need to accept the fact right now I'm stuck and I have to step away. It's a mini version of acceptance.
Yeah. And, as you were sharing like that, just the different innocuous ways that it can present in our, like, it can be, not even necessarily, feeling burnt. And we've used this example probably in too many episodes, but getting, someone cutting you off in traffic, or you go to the store and they don't have the item that you're looking for. You're just missed out in line, for something that you were looking at. It's like, I was so close. I mean, that's all except your sports team loses. It's all acceptance.
Yeah.
And so it can be this common experience. And I think we shine a spotlight on the big things that are harder to accept or that require more effort to accept. But I think if we take some time to be introspective, we can recognize that I think the vast majority of us are pretty good acceptors on any given day for a variety of things. And if we can amplify that experience that we do in those small moments, it's kind of like it is a condensed version, or maybe like a little how-to guide of how to do it when it's much harder.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I several months ago, I had a person I was working with, and just on a simple kind of situation, person having anger problems, and would go into a store, and if he waited 2 or 3 minutes in line, he would be like, "Oh, the cashier's slow," and he's this and it would literally ruin his day. And we were talking, and so I guess this is more than a few months ago, because this is November-ish, December maybe. And he talks about going Christmas shopping. And he was talking, he's like, "Oh yeah, the store was really crowded. Like, it took me, half hour to check out." But he wasn't angry about it. And I said, "Wow, that's kind of interesting." Like I said, "Why is it okay now?" He goes, "Well, it's Christmas time. Like at Christmas, we know the stores are going to be crowded. It's okay." And I was like, "Wow, you gave yourself permission to, do that." But in another time period, it would have been a burden to him. So we do have good acceptance sometimes for things. And sometimes we go into a situation prepared to accept it. So on Black Friday, most people are prepared to stand in line to check out.
Yeah.
But if you go to the grocery store on a Sunday and 2 people are in front of you, you may be upset about it.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is that reframe of just going, "You know what? Hey, it's just a busy day today. It's whatever it might be." So yeah, I think it happens all the time.
Well, and right, I think we're nearing the end, so we'll have to accept that the end is near here. But
yeah.
I think to just kind of reiterate for our listeners that this idea of acceptance being an active process that balances the validating with also the letting go, and if we can do both of those things well, it creates more freedom and more movement for ourselves. And while counterintuitive, man, is it such an effective tool.
I agree.
We hope you enjoyed. Tune in next week. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.